I paid off my parents' mortgage as a surprise for their anniversary. Then got a group text. "We're giving your room to Brian's girlfriend. Unlike you, she actually contributes to this family." My dad added, "Don't make it awkward. Just be grateful you were ever included." I just responded, "Noted." That night, I made 3 calls. They discovered the house was no longer theirs. I, 29M, never thought that paying off my parents' mortgage would be the beginning of the end of our relationship. Looking back now, maybe I should have seen the signs earlier, but love makes you blind to red flags, even when they're waving right in front of your face. 3 months ago, I surprised my parents for their 30th wedding anniversary by secretly paying off their remaining mortgage balance. The house they'd struggled to keep for 25 years was finally theirs, free and clear. I'd been saving for years, working 80-hour weeks at my tech job, living in a cramped studio apartment while my salary grew. When I handed them the deed that night at their anniversary dinner, Mom cried and Dad hugged me tighter than he had since I was a kid. What I didn't know was that my younger brother Brian had been living there for the past 8 months, rent-free, after dropping out of college for the 3rd time. While I was grinding away in Silicon Valley, sending money home whenever they mentioned financial troubles, Brian was treating their house like his personal bachelor pad. The group text arrived on a Thursday evening while I was debugging code for a major client presentation. My phone buzzed, and I glanced at the family chat that included Mom, Dad, Brian, and me. Brian had typed a message that made my blood run cold. He announced they were giving my childhood room to his girlfriend, who, unlike me, actually contributed to the family. The words hit like physical blows. My room, the one with my high school trophies still on the shelf, my old books, the desk where I'd written my college application essays. The room I'd assumed would always be mine when I visited. Dad's follow-up message was worse. He told me not to make things awkward and to just be grateful I was ever included. The casual cruelty of it stunned me. After everything I'd done, every sacrifice I'd made, every dollar I'd sent home over the years, this was how they saw me. An outsider who should be grateful for scraps. I stared at my phone for a long time, watching the typing indicators appear and disappear as they probably discussed me in real time. My hands shook as I typed my response. Noted. 2 letters that somehow contained all my hurt, anger, and disappointment. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my studio apartment, looking at bank statements and legal documents spread across my tiny kitchen table. The more I thought about it, the more pieces fell into place. Brian had never held a job for more than 6 months. He'd wrecked 2 cars that Dad had somehow managed to replace. He'd dropped out of 3 different schools, each time with my parents making excuses about how he just needed to find his path. Meanwhile, I'd been the reliable one. Good grades, scholarship to college, steady job, never asked for money, only gave it. I'd paid for Dad's medical bills when he had that scare 2 years ago. I'd covered Brian's tuition for his last attempt at college. I'd helped with car repairs, emergency expenses, even groceries when times were tight. The house deed was in my name as the mortgage payer, something the bank had arranged as part of the payoff process. Legally, I owned the house my parents had lived in for 25 years. I'd intended to quietly transfer it to them once the paperwork cleared, a final surprise to complete the gift. Now, that paperwork sat unsigned in my filing cabinet. I made the first call to my lawyer at 8 in the morning. He confirmed what I already suspected. Since I'd paid off the mortgage and the deed was in my name, the house was legally mine. My parents had no claim to it beyond whatever tenancy rights they might have established, which in our state was minimal for family arrangements. The second call was to a property management company. I explained that I had tenants who needed to vacate a property I'd recently acquired. They walked me through the legal eviction process, though they warned it might take months given family complications. The third call was the hardest. I phoned my Uncle Rick, Dad's brother, who'd always been the family mediator. I told him everything, the mortgage payment, the group text, my legal position. He listened quietly, asking clarifying questions. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment before saying he'd suspected something like this might happen eventually. He'd watched Brian get away with everything while I was held to impossible standards. Uncle Rick offered to break the news to my parents, but I declined. This conversation needed to come from me. I drove home that weekend, my first visit since the anniversary dinner. The house looked the same from the outside, but I noticed Brian's girlfriend's car in the driveway and unfamiliar belongings visible through my old bedroom window. Mom answered the door with a surprised smile, as if the group text had never happened. She asked about work and whether I'd eaten, the same questions she'd asked since I was in high school. Dad emerged from the living room, beer in hand, greeting me with the same casual warmth he'd shown before effectively disowning me via text message. Brian appeared at the top of the stairs, shirtless and clearly just woken up despite it being past noon. His girlfriend peeked out from behind him, a woman I'd never met who was apparently more family than I was. I sat them all down in the living room and pulled out a folder of documents. I explained calmly that the house was legally mine, that I'd intended to transfer ownership as a surprise, but that recent events had changed my perspective on family dynamics. Mom's face went through several expressions: confusion, disbelief, then growing panic as the implications sank in. Dad's reaction was more immediate and predictable. He launched into a lecture about family loyalty and how everything they'd done was for the good of everyone involved. Brian's girlfriend disappeared upstairs, smart enough to recognize a family meltdown in progress. Brian himself seemed stunned, probably calculating how this would affect his rent-free lifestyle. I let Dad finish his speech before responding that I'd given them 30 days to make arrangements. The house would be sold, with proceeds going toward my own future since I apparently wasn't considered part of theirs. I could help them find rental options if they wanted, but the house would no longer be their home. The explosion that followed was predictable, but still painful. Dad accused me of being vindictive and ungrateful. Mom cried and asked how I could do this to them after everything they'd sacrificed. Brian stayed silent, perhaps finally understanding that actions have consequences. I stood up, folder in hand, and walked toward the door. As I reached for the handle, Dad played his final card. He said if I went through with this, I'd be dead to them. No more family holidays, no more phone calls, no more relationship at all. I turned around and looked at the three of them, the people who'd raised me, loved me, and ultimately shown me exactly where I stood in their priorities. I told them the relationship had already ended with that group text. I was just making it official. Update 1. The first week after that conversation was brutal. Mom called constantly, leaving tearful voicemails about how we could work things out as a family. Dad sent angry text messages about legal action, though my lawyer assured me they had no case. Brian, surprisingly, was the only one who didn't contact me directly. I spent those days apartment hunting in my hometown, looking for a place my parents could afford on Dad's disability income. Despite everything, I wasn't heartless. I found 3 options within their budget and sent the listings to Uncle Rick, asking him to pass them along. The second week brought unexpected allies. My cousin Sarah, Uncle Rick's daughter, called to say she'd heard what happened and wasn't surprised. She shared stories I'd never heard about family gatherings I'd missed, how Brian would show up empty-handed while I always brought gifts, how my parents would complain about money while Brian lived rent-free, how they dismissed my career success as lucky while making excuses for Brian's failures. Other relatives began reaching out. Apparently, the family dynamic I'd thought was normal was actually a source of ongoing discussion among extended family members. Everyone had noticed, but nobody had said anything out of politeness. Update 2. By the third week, the anger had shifted to desperation. Mom showed up at my apartment unannounced, begging me to reconsider. She'd brought photo albums and home movies, trying to remind me of happier times. We sat on my couch looking at pictures of family vacations, birthday parties, graduations, all the moments that had built the foundation of love that made this betrayal so devastating. She asked what she could do to fix things. When I mentioned the group text, she claimed she'd never seen it, that Brian had added her to some conversation without her knowledge. But when I showed her the message thread on my phone, her name was clearly there as a participant, with red receipts showing she'd seen every message. The lies hurt almost as much as the original betrayal. I told her I needed honesty if we were going to rebuild anything, but she continued insisting she hadn't known about the plan to give away my room. Even when I pointed out that she'd have had to approve the girlfriend moving in, she stuck to her story. Dad never came to apologize. His pride apparently wouldn't allow it, even as the reality of their situation set in. Uncle Rick mentioned that Dad had been researching tenant rights and looking for ways to fight the eviction, but every lawyer he consulted told him the same thing. I held all the legal cards. Update 3. The fourth week brought a breakthrough from an unexpected source. Brian showed up at my apartment on a Wednesday evening, looking worse than I'd seen him since his last breakup. His girlfriend had left him, apparently unwilling to deal with the housing uncertainty. He'd been staying on friends' couches, finally experiencing the instability that most adults face when they can't afford their living situation. He apologized, really apologized, not the half-hearted sorry you feel that way non-apologies our family usually trafficked in. He admitted he'd orchestrated the group text because he was tired of feeling compared to me, tired of being the family disappointment while I was the golden child who could do no wrong. What he hadn't expected was for Mom and Dad to go along with it so enthusiastically. He'd thought they'd defend me, maybe tell him he was being unfair. Instead, they'd embrace the opportunity to put me in my place, to remind me that blood family would always matter more than chosen family, no matter how much money I contributed. His insight into our parents' psychology was illuminating and depressing. According to Brian, they'd grown resentful of my success, feeling like my achievements highlighted their own limitations. Every promotion I earned, every financial milestone I reached, every problem I solved for them only reinforced their sense of inadequacy. Brian's apology was genuine, but it didn't change the fundamental equation. He was 26 years old and had never supported himself. Mom and Dad had created a dynamic where he was rewarded for failure and I was punished for success. Fixing that would require changes none of them seemed willing to make. Update 4. The final week of their 30-day notice brought a last-ditch intervention orchestrated by extended family. Uncle Rick, Aunt Linda, and 2 cousins showed up for what they called a family meeting. They'd convinced Mom and Dad to attend by promising neutral mediation. We met at Uncle Rick's house, sitting around the same dining room table where we'd had countless holiday dinners. The atmosphere was tense but civil, everyone trying to find a path forward that didn't involve lawyers and permanent estrangement. The conversation started with Mom and Dad finally acknowledging the group text and admitting it had been cruel. Dad offered what passed for an apology in our family, a grudging admission that maybe they'd handled things poorly. Mom was more emotional, crying as she talked about losing me over something that had seemed small at the time. But when I asked them to explain their thinking, the truth emerged. They genuinely believed I should be grateful for any inclusion in family decisions, that my financial contributions were just what successful children did for their parents. The idea that I might have my own needs or feelings about family dynamics hadn't occurred to them. Brian, to his credit, supported my position throughout the meeting. He told them he'd initiated the group text to get attention, but that their response had shown him how they really viewed family hierarchy. He admitted he needed to move out and start supporting himself, regardless of what happened with the house. Uncle Rick proposed a compromise. I would transfer the house to Mom and Dad as originally planned, but with conditions. Brian would move out within 60 days and start paying rent if he ever moved back. Family communications would go through Uncle Rick for 6 months while we rebuilt trust. Mom and Dad would attend family counseling to work through their resentment issues. I considered the proposal for several days. Part of me wanted my family back, wanted to believe things could change. But another part recognized that nothing in their behavior during this month had shown genuine change, only panic at losing their security. Final update. In the end, I chose a middle path that surprised everyone, including myself. I sold the house, but not to strangers. Uncle Rick had mentioned that my cousin Michael was looking to buy in the area, so I sold it to him at a fair market price. The proceeds went partly to purchasing a smaller condo for Mom and Dad, mortgage-free, but with clear boundaries about occupancy and financial responsibility. The remaining money went into a trust fund that would cover their basic expenses for the rest of their lives, managed by Uncle Rick to prevent any future manipulation or guilt trips. They would never be homeless or hungry, but they would also never again have financial leverage over me. Brian found a roommate and moved into a 2-bedroom apartment across town. He's been working steadily for 3 months now, the longest employment streak of his adult life. We have coffee occasionally, still rebuilding our relationship slowly. Mom and Dad, that's complicated. They have security, healthcare, and family support, but our relationship remains distant. They never fully acknowledged the deeper issues that led to this situation, instead focusing on my overreaction to what they still characterize as a misunderstanding. I've learned that sometimes love isn't enough to fix a fundamentally broken dynamic. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is establish boundaries that protect everyone involved, even if it means accepting that some relationships will never be what you hoped they could be. The house that love built became the house that taught me about self-respect. I don't regret paying off their mortgage, and I don't regret the consequences that followed. Some lessons are worth the price of admission, even when that price is higher than you ever imagined you'd have to pay. Looking back, that group text wasn't the end of our family. It was just the moment I finally saw clearly what our family had always been. The question wasn't whether I could forgive them for that moment of cruelty. The question was whether I could forgive myself for accepting less than I deserved for so many years. The answer, thankfully, was yes.